Watch right now on the Front News Project. The battle for Belgorod has begun in the SU. The border with the Caucasus has been breached. Oil depots are burning under fire. Russian soldiers are shelling Sudzha, the Russian world in all its glory. Hellish arrivals in Kyiv and Sumy. The enemy continues the genocide of peaceful Ukrainians. Fiery, hot and blazing. Watch footage from the front line right now. The bloody war continues. The war that Vladimir Putin and his pack unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the entire Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom continues. Greetings, this is Front News. With you is Vladimir Timoshenko. The next 30 minutes, you will find the truth about the war, which our journalists gather from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then we begin. And we start right away with exclusive material. Kremlin terrorists shelled their own Sudzha gas measuring station. And of course blamed Ukraine for it. Well, that's the signature, Kremlin style. And also this week, drones now from the armed forces of Ukraine struck hard at the oil depot. Caucasian. The Russians were extinguishing the fire there all week. Why is this particular strike? So, I would even say, especially painful for the Russian Federation? This is exactly what our next report is about.
A new provocation from the Russians. Putin's occupation forces shelled the Sudzha gas metering station in the Kursk region and blamed it on Ukraine. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, this station has been repeatedly shelled by the Russians themselves. In particular, last summer it was bombed with guided aerial bombs, and 3 days ago the Russians hit it again with cabbies.
In fact, the Russian Federation is undermining these agreements, and by striking the Sudzha gas distribution station, it is trying to discredit Ukraine's defense forces to supposedly show the Ukrainian side's inability to negotiate, moreover, the violation of previously reached agreements. In other words, the possibility of the very fact of concluding a 30-day ceasefire and accordingly further moving towards the so-called peace agreements to end the war in Ukraine. And all this shows that it is a planned nature of the Russian provocation.
Meanwhile, in Kuban, the oil depot continues to blaze. Caucasian. The Kavkazskaya oil depot was attacked by drones on the night of March 19th. The enterprise halted its operations because the drones disabled the pipeline between the tanks. But yeah, the refinery has been burning for the second day now.
The entire plant is completely on fire. Uncontrolled burning has already started. There isn't a single fire truck on the premises. Everyone has evacuated from there. All the hoses have burned everything that was there.
According to Russian media, during the firefighting process, an explosion of petroleum products occurred due to the depressurization of a burning tank and the release of burning oil.
What is happening today is the explosion of one of the tanks and the increase of the fire area to 10,000 square meters. That is, the Russian Federation is forced to acknowledge the most serious problems at the moment. A, the consequences of Ukrainian strikes using UAVs. B, the possibility of pumping oil products. And this oil depot was used as a transit point, and accordingly, the inability of the local central authority. A, to counter all external threats in the form of drone strikes and to promptly eliminate the consequences of Ukrainian attacks.
And while Russia is ablaze, Putin's chief security aide, Sergei Shoigu, has arrived in North Korea. The main Russian security veteran, Comrade Sergei Shoigu. Shoigu is supposed to meet with Kim Jong-un and other DPRK officials. The North Korean dictator has become a key ally of Putin in the war in Ukraine.
Apparently, Shoigu's visit is related to the future nature of supplies, weapons produced by directly for the needs of the occupying country's army. Primarily, it concerns Caucasus, drones produced by North Korea, and most importantly, the personnel of the DPRK military, plus artillery shells for the needs of the occupying army.
And in the skies over Ukraine, British Typhoon or F-35 fighters may appear. The United Kingdom may take a leading role in providing air cover for the troops. In the coming weeks, planes will be sent to Poland, but they may later be transferred to Ukraine, reports The Telegraph.
In principle, indeed, the British Typhoon, it meets in its class either the Russian Su-35 or the American F-16E. If there is a positive decision regarding the transfer or the coverage of airspace, thanks to the British Typhoons, this will significantly enhance the capabilities of the Ukrainian side, both in terms of air defense, and the Typhoons will be used to destroy drones, missiles, and aerodynamic targets. But most importantly, it is accordingly striking command posts, temporary deployment points, and heavy armored vehicle accumulation points.
Dozens of countries have offered to provide troops, planes, ships, and other resources for a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. All in order to end the bloody war, initiated by Putin.
Well, now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Kramatorsk and Toretsk fronts. The enemy continues its military terror. On the Kramatorsk front, the aggressors attacked the defense forces' positions 3 times in the area of Chasiv Yar and towards Delyevka. On the Toretsk front, the enemy attacked a total of 10 times. In the area of Toretsk and near Delyevka, Dakhne, and Krymske. Another battle is currently ongoing there. Another act of genocide against the Ukrainian people. Recently, Kyiv experienced one of the most terrifying nights since the full-scale war began. A massive Russian drone attack not only struck the city, but also claimed the lives of civilians. Enemy fire killed 3 people. Among the dead were a father and his 5-year-old daughter. 10 people were injured. The youngest victim was only 11 months old. But unfortunately, the Russian terror against civilians did not end there. On March 24th, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Russian forces launched missile strikes on a densely populated residential area in the city of Sumy. Residential buildings were destroyed and schools, a kindergarten, a hospital, and other infrastructure were damaged. Furthermore, it is currently known that there are over 100 injured, among whom there are children once again. Now let's analyze the situation on the Kupiansk and Kharkiv fronts. The enemy is becoming more daring here as well. On the Kharkiv front, the aggressors attacked the defense forces' positions twice in the area of the settlement of Vovchansk. The settlements of Svetlykne and Slatino were hit by airstrikes. On the Kupiansk front, the enemy attacked our troops' positions 4 times in the areas of Petropavlivka, Stepne, Novoselki, and also Zarisove. 3 clashes are still ongoing. It has been more than 3 years since the enemy army's brutal strike on the Mariupol Drama Theater. This week, residents of several Ukrainian cities took to the streets with flowers, candles, and children's toys to honor the memory of more than 1,000 Ukrainians who perished. March 16th, 2022. At that time, in the very center of Mariupol, already engulfed in flames, people were taking shelter in the theater building, hoping to escape the relentless bombings. Correspondent Mariana Bukan from KTSN will now tell us about the fate of those who survived this horror. Her chilling report follows.
I want to enter this story.
Sergei Ovcharenko with the pseudonym Dobryak went to serve in Azovstal back in 2014. He resigned 5 years later. His fiancée Victoria insisted on a civilian life. At the moment of the full-scale invasion, Sergei was working abroad. He quickly packed his things, came to Ukraine, and immediately, as part of the reconnaissance team, flew on one of the helicopters to the already surrounded city.
There were only 4 helicopters. 2 with ammunition and 2 with troops.
Well, with troops.
The very next day, Dobryak realized the full bravery and courage of his action.
And Saronia, like Sergei, where are you going?
Sergei, where did you arrive? I didn't understand anything because back then it was somehow an enthusiasm, on some kind of adrenaline. You arrive, everything is being bombed, aviation. You don't understand where you are. The next day when I woke up, I thought, aha, cool.
Cool. In the end? But seriously?
Am I seriously here? Did I make some kind of mistake? But then I realized no.
For all 86 days until entering the so-called calculated captivity, Sergei did not receive a single injury. He says, despite all the horror that was happening in Mariupol in general and at Azovstal in particular, fear. There he didn't even feel it.
Probably it was scarier for those people who just, let's say, entered the bunker on February 24th, or I don't know, and only came out during the release from captivity. It was much scarier for those people.
Well, the shelling was really quite intense.
It was so intense that the walls in the bunker were shaking, even.
That is, even in the bunker.
Anatoly Voloshin is one of those whom Dobryak is talking about. He lived in Mariupol, worked as a bulldozer operator, and was a pastor of one of the Protestant churches. At the start of the full-scale invasion, he volunteered to dig trenches on the front line. In early March, he was wounded.
When we were passing through the Azovstal territory at the exit gates, a shell exploded above our vehicle on March 14th. I was wounded and ended up in the hospital.
And the very next day, enemy shells targeted the hospital as well. Anatoly received a second wound. I stood up. My abdomen was cut open because they were checking what injuries I had. A fragment flew in and stopped near the heart. Anatoly was brought to Azovstal.
The atmosphere of practicality.
There was practically no atmosphere because of the dust. Constant explosions near that bunker. We were given 2 cans of canned sorry for 5 people. For 1 meal it was 2 cans of sorry. There was practically no bread, not practically, but none at all. A small cup of porridge.
In mid-April, all the defenders of Mariupol relocated there as well.
Azovstal was being shelled from all sides. At Azovstal, what was more frightening was that you had no idea what would happen to you.
Dobryak recalls that before going into what was called honorable captivity for 3-4 months, the guys in the Azovstal bunkers destroyed everything they could.
Everything.
That was there. We dismantled and just scattered everywhere. In the end, we just doused everything with gasoline, diesel, doused everything and shot the radios. And in the end, when we were leaving, we set it on fire and left.
We kind of exited, it floated up, and then we left.
And then there was Olenivka and a terrorist attack in one of the barracks.
They take the guys and then the terrorist attack happens. You understand that no, this is not an honorable captivity.
Anatoly was held by the Russians in prison for 295 days. Sergei spent 3 times as long in captivity.
848 days.
This is Sergei right after the exchange in September of last year. All the time of his captivity. In Ukraine, his mother and fiancé fought for his release. In particular, they went out weekly to support actions for the prisoners of war and waited.
Wait, we'll see each other soon. I love and hug everyone.
Just 3 months after being released from captivity, Sergei and Victoria got married. I like it. I like family life. In general, I like spending time with Sergei, living together, communicating, relaxing. Chatting. Resting. Sergei has already regained his vision, had knee surgery, he is rehabilitating, and together with Vaika, they have big plans.
Children like stars in the sky.
Children like stars in the sky. Business, money, finances.
Cash.
The first thing is a child. We really want a child.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And now we move to the blazing Pokrovska front line of the Russian world, where the brutality continues. On the Pokrovsko direction, since the beginning of the day, the occupiers have made 31 attempts to push back our defenders from positions in the areas of the settlements of Panteleimonovka, Alexandropol, Yelizavetovka, Lisovka, Kotlina, Udachnoe, Uspenovka, Novoandreevka, Andreevka, and towards Pokrovsk, Kotlyarovka, Doen, Alexeyevka. The defense forces are holding back the enemy's onslaught and have already repelled 27 attacks. 4 clashes are still ongoing, but you know Russia has indeed become less active in the Pokrovsko direction. However, they are trying to restore the intensity of their actions. This was stated by the spokesperson of the Kortitsia troop grouping, Viktor Tregubov. But still, how did our heroes manage to halt the Russian troops near Pokrovsko? What is happening in the Kursk region? And how are the armed forces of Ukraine managing to advance and secure positions in the Belgorod region? Our report on the latest news from the front follows.
The armed forces repelled the offensive on Pokrovsko and launched an attack in the Belgorod region. Meanwhile, Russia's attempts to storm the south of Ukraine have not been successful. What is the situation on the front today, and what lies is the Kremlin telling while reporting on its successes? The information that the armed forces of Ukraine launched an offensive in the Belgorod region caused quite a stir recently. At that time, the discussion was about the battles for the village of Demidovka. But by the end of the week, the area under the control of Ukrainian forces expanded by 2 more settlements. According to Z military correspondents, the Ukrainian troop grouping decided to stretch along the border, creating a kind of buffer zone. At the same time, analysts name another task of the Belgorod operation as attempts to draw part of the Russian troops there, which are currently attacking in the Kursk region. Officially, the Russian military leadership acknowledged that the Ukrainians have once again breached their border. However, in their characteristic manner, they stated that there are no more than 50 saboteurs. At the same time, they are allegedly suffering heavy losses. Simultaneously, they are losing tanks, BMPs, and other equipment.
According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, several were lost, as reported by this military command. Of the military command, several long-range howitzers of American manufacture. This causes the greatest objection and amazement. Because you play, now, because you play. To take long-range artillery with you in an attack on enemy territory, well, that requires some thinking. I think that no one has done this. So these reports, they are naturally typical for the Russian military leadership. These are fake reports where the enemy's losses are simply fabricated, having no relation to the real situation.
Another Russian fake which is actively spreading online is that the Russian Federation is preparing to occupy the largest cities in the north and south of Ukraine. Recently, President Zelensky did indeed say that these regions should be ready to repel attacks. But occupation? Here, Kremlin propaganda has clearly overdone it. We can prepare for any scenario.
We must be ready for the development of any kind of events, but to say that these actions will lead to the occupation of Kharkiv, Sumy or Zaporizhzhia would be a significant exaggeration. Well, then they will simply be engaged. The enemy does not have the strength to capture Kharkiv, Sumy, Zaporizhzhia.
But then why is the Russian Federation preparing a possible offensive in new directions? According to analysts, we have seen something similar since the first day of the war, where the main strike is in one place and the other assaults serve to distract attention and tie up the reserves of the armed forces of Ukraine. Strategically.
The strategic direction for the enemy remains the Donetsk area. But again, based on the patterns of Russian military science, an offensive in this section of the front involves secondary offensive actions or a diversionary offensive, which today could include actions in the Sumy, Kharkiv and Zaporizhzhia regions.
And on the main attack direction, considering the enemy's efforts and losses, it can be said that there are no results. Paying daily with hundreds of lives mobilized for mere tens of meters of advancement, the Kremlin still has not been able to achieve its main goal of capturing Pokrovsk since last year. 2 weeks ago, they were stopped by the Arcto, 110th.
I think it was the 1st Brigade that stopped them, disrupted their logistics during the assault, and drove them from their positions. Then the 25th Airborne completely dismantled them there. Those who could fled, and they liberated the settlement. Then there were 5 or 6 episodes already in the Pokrovsk direction when the enemy even driven from their positions as our forces advanced forward. This is still a small counteroffensive, it's just the situation on the battlefield, but it already shows that they are exhausted there and their strength. They are lacking.
In light of this, analysts believe that a breakthrough by the Russians in other sections of the front should not be expected. Everyone now understands that the occupation of the Donetsk region is task number 1 for Putin. Therefore, the Kremlin will definitely not deploy prepared units to the south or north of Ukraine.
To what extent does the enemy have the resources that would allow them to conduct active operations on several sections of the front simultaneously? There is only one conclusion. The enemy does not have such resources. As of today, I'll say more. At the peak of their activity, we observed the number of the enemy, and this was mentioned by General Budanov and the President of Ukraine. The number of the enemy was up to 650,000. Today we are talking about approximately 610,000 operating on the fronts. So approximately 3 divisions have disappeared somewhere.
In all fairness, it should be said that the Russians do have some successes. By gathering everything possible and supplementing their troops with North Koreans, they were still able to push the Ukrainian armed forces from their positions in the Kursk region. However, our military is fulfilling their tasks there. To this day, holding a bridgehead of about 100 square kilometers and repeatedly thwarting all Russian attempts to encircle them.
The Ukrainian defense forces have likely found an effective way to combat guided aerial bombs, not JDAMs, which the aggressor country's army, the Russian Federation, is dropping by the hundreds on Ukrainian positions and frontline settlements. This is stated in the material published by The Telegraph on March 10th. So, is it really true? Have the Ukrainians found a countermeasure to these deadly bombs? Our colleagues from the SpecCorp project have investigated this issue. Let's watch.
Huge craters, destroyed houses, and shattered streets are the consequences of enemy attacks on the frontline city of Kostiantynivka. The Russians send up to a dozen guided aerial bombs of varying power there daily, practically leveling the city to the ground.
They use aerial bombs of different power, 250 kilograms, half a ton, even 3 tons. So this is a serious problem. And in 2023 they effectively used them at the beginning of their advance, in offensive actions, and then added artillery and brought in infantry.
It was precisely thanks to the tactic of first bombing, then assault, that in February of last year the Russian army was able to capture Avdiivka and advance towards Pokrovsk. In September 2024, the occupiers dropped more than 900 bombs along the entire front in just 1 week. This number became a record. However, at the moment, Russia's most powerful conventional weapon, which until recently our military could hardly counter, has begun to seriously lose its effectiveness.
Previously, to dismantle our positions and hit the target, it took about 1-2 bombs, but now it takes about 15-16 on average. That is, quantitatively speaking, the pressure from the bombs has not decreased. Well, I mean, they drop a lot of them, hoping that some will hit.
The Russians use several typical designs of bombs for launching. The most common is when an explosive aerial bomb of various weights is equipped with the so-called UMPK, a Universal Planning and Correction Module. Simply put, they add foldable wings and a GPS module. This allows attacking targets from a distance of up to 60 kilometers. Jamming the guidance block of the bomb was considered almost impossible for nearly 2 years.
It is quite possible to act directly on the UMPK kit using electronic warfare means, suppressing the navigation satellite, understanding that this does not mean a 100% guarantee of the result. The result is that the arrival happens anyway. That is, there are still arrivals, but considering that our front line is very dense, roughly speaking, they fall either in front of the positions or behind the positions.
Another way to counter enemy caps, which are actively used in the armed forces, is to shoot down enemy reconnaissance drones. These are mainly drones like Orlan and Zala.
Sukharevsky, the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces, stated that Ukraine is developing its own laser weapons. Plus, we have even older developments of our own. These are anti-aircraft missiles of the Coral 2 type, about which nothing has been said for a very long time. Heard. The best way, of course, would be to combat Russian aviation, but there are problems here. Firstly, we must keep our air defense systems at a distance, because otherwise the enemy will start hunting them. Our F-16s, they are mainly needed for air defense.
Unknown experimental weapon against the Russian KAB was used by Ukraine during the air attack on Zaporizhzhia on February 6th. At that time, the bomb was successfully shot down. The Air Force assured that this was not the first case of a successful KAB interception, but not a word about the method of engagement.
During this time, it was possible to carry out strikes, as we remember, on enterprises that produce, as well as on warehouses and airfields. Here, more long-range weapons are needed, which were not provided to us, as is known, our allies, primarily the Americans, either limited or stopped.
However, all known methods of countering bombs are more of a constant search for an effective method than an already existing efficient algorithm. In particular, the information from Forbes that Ukraine is jamming bombs along the entire front line, destroying them. One of Russia's most significant advantages is considered too optimistic. Experts are convinced.
I can only quote Sergei Flash, a specialist who immediately reacted to this and wrote, "And do the Russian bombs know about this?" The primary source of this information is Fighter Bomber, a Russian blogger who wrote not that they are ineffective, but that the consumption of ammunition has increased, in his opinion.
However, it is possible to counter the bombs, and the methods are known. The question is only about the cost and availability of resources, which Ukraine lacks, especially compared to the number of bombs the Russians have.
This UMPK, these wings and motors, they can even be installed in makeshift conditions. That is, they take an ordinary aerial bomb and within 2 or 3 days all these devices are attached to it.
At the same time, an affordable and effective algorithm for intercepting KABs is currently being sought and tested without exaggeration. All of Ukraine's allies. And this work, engineers cautiously suggest, is capable of ending with the desired result.
Well, now, let's analyze the situation in detail on the Huliaipol and Orikhiv fronts. Let's be honest, this is another sacred goal for Putin and his entourage. Accordingly, the situation here is extremely tense. On the Huliaipol front, the enemy attacked our troops twice, trying to advance towards the open field. The aggressor also carried out airstrikes on the areas of the settlements of Novodarivka, Malinivka, and Huliaipol. On the Orikhiv front, the enemy unsuccessfully attempted to advance towards Lobkov. The aggressor conducted an airstrike on the settlement of Kamianske. Destroy the enemy remotely. The 65th Brigade Bolshoi Lug has acquired another ground drone. In contrast to logistical and evacuation vehicles, this is the killer drone Nom-2. It is equipped with a machine gun and 2 grenade launchers, and it is precisely this that will destroy the occupiers. The soldiers have already tested the machine at the training ground. These tests were first seen by TSN journalist Kira Oves. Her report follows.
The final adjustment. The soldiers firmly attach the machine gun and grenade launcher, and Nom-2 is ready for its first live fire tests. The control system of this robot is no different from aerial FPVs. Cameras are installed on the drone so the soldier can see where it's going and its target. Everything is displayed on the controller's screen. Commands are also issued from here.
This is actually the second time in my life I've held this controller and the drone more or less obeyed. Admittedly, with some specific delays, but you need to learn everything. And I think that anyone can learn to skillfully operate this equipment in a few weeks. You can insert 2 RPG machine guns. Each RPG will have 1 shot. After that, they need to be reloaded. As for the machine gun, you load the belt and go. You can fire in bursts or single shots.
Yuri is originally from Volnyansk in Zaporizhzhia. He voluntarily joined the armed forces 5 months ago. In civilian life, he is an auto-electrician. These skills have been useful in the military. After all, he was the one who improved the drone.
He made the system more compact, so that it could fit anywhere. It could be moved from point A to point B, but that wasn't the only thing they did. They also worked on the release system to make it work better.
Drones of various modifications are currently indispensable on the front line. They ease the heavy daily work of the military.
This robot, in fact, in terms of workload, replaces in particular 3 people if used to its maximum capabilities. A very practical thing. We can avoid risking the lives of military personnel. Of course, it's easier to put out a piece of metal to take the hit. Whether it takes the hit, it changes a lot. And,
Drones today are a priority. Drones are life. And drones are our great helpers.
Due to the activity of enemy eyes in the sky, dangerous fiber optic FPV drones, it is becoming increasingly difficult for our warriors to protect themselves. Therefore, we need drones and as many as possible so that the military can operate and destroy the enemy from cover.
in fact, today there is a huge demand in the Ukrainian army for robotic systems that will somewhat replace people. Because as you probably know, in Zaporizhzhia the situation is probably the most difficult, especially when it comes to reaching positions and returning from them. Children will come, go to positions, turn back to no.
The Russian invaders do not cease their attempts to advance even by a centimeter in the Zaporizhzhia direction, say the defenders. To stop the enemy, our warriors need help, not only with equipment, but also with people who will operate it.
That's all for today, but very soon on the Front News program. New, unique materials from our journalists and the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.